Okay. Hello and welcome to everybody joining us. My name is Jonathan Cohn. I'm the policy director here with Progressive Mass. If you're kind of coming for your whatever number event or just first, just as a reminder, we do multi-issue statewide advocacy work, recognizing that here in Massachusetts, we should be doing the things that many people think Massachusetts has already accomplished, as I like to say, and living up to the potential that many of us see in their state. We in Massachusetts, as I always remind people, have the third largest Democratic supermajority in the country after Hawaii and Rhode Island. And we should make sure that that legislature is passing agenda setting legislation that both pushes back against the chaos, cruelty, and corruption happening in DC, but also makes a better world for the 7 million people here in the Commonwealth and spreads good policy outward and upward. We're here tonight to kick off a series of events that will be called our Spring Forward series. Right, as we're now have a little bit more daylight and hopefully some better weather to come. And then we want to talk and dig deeper into some of the key policy issues on the top of our minds, and also I'm sure on the top of yours as well. So I'm delighted to start that off with kind of a discussion of a topic that I'm sure is on everybody's mind, is what we in Massachusetts can do about ICE. For the past well over a year now, we've seen the way that ICE agents have been terrorizing people, communities across the country and here in Massachusetts in kind of violent and clearly lawless ways. And we know that there's more that we can be doing at the state level. But the question is always, what can we be doing here? And what can we be doing? Why hasn't it happened yet? And what can we do collectively to make sure that it finally does? So I'm delighted to cheer up Laura Rotolo from ACLU of Massachusetts. I'm going to bring you up here. If you want to take it away, you have screen sharing power. So just as a reminder for people, Laura has a presentation. She has an amazing slide deck. I know it's amazing because she made it, enough that I ready. Laura will present. If you have questions while she's talking, drop your questions in the chat. We'll do a formal Q&A afterwards. And then at the end, we'll have an action component. But I'm handing it over right now. So I'll take myself off spotlight and hand it over.
Great.
Let me re-spotlight you. I accidentally took you off.
Okay, well, thank you so much, John, and it's great to see all of you here tonight. Thank you for the invitation. It's great to see so many faces that I already know. Shout out to my Medford folks, Medford in the house. We're doing so much in Medford, so it's great to see you all here. So let's talk about what we can do to stop ICE together. My name is Laura Rotolo. I work at the ACLU of Massachusetts, as you can see by my sign. I've been there for almost 20 years, if you can believe it. I don't know how that happened, but this has happened. I've been there for almost 20 years, focusing a lot on immigrants' rights in my tenure here. And I work with a fantastic team of organizers, lobbyists, not legislators, litigators, communications professionals. We have an amazing team, and more of us do work on immigrants' rights right now because of the times that we are living through. So here's my little slide deck. Let's talk about what we can do to stop ICE, to stand up to ICE here in Massachusetts. I am going to go over just some table setting landscape of how immigration enforcement looks right now in Massachusetts and all of New England. I just caught my first typo, yay me. And then we're going to talk about some policy updates, what policies are passing, which ones are being proposed, which ones are moving, and then what we can all do about these things together. So I know that you are all very plugged in, and so I apologize if any of this is repetitive, but I want to give you a little bit of an idea of just how much immigration has changed in Massachusetts in this past year and some months. Um, uh, it's no surprise ICE is arresting many more people every day in Massachusetts. There have been huge increases, and they happen every single day. Here's some numbers to show this. In New England, and we talk about New England often because the ICE sort of world is split up into regions, and the Boston office of ICE actually serves all of New England, so Connecticut, Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. And so they tend to work in all of those areas. Deportations in New England, according to the WBUR poll, has increased tenfold actually, comparing 2024 to 2025. So in 2024, we saw less than 1,000 deportations out of New England. So people who went all the way through the process and were actually removed from the country. That was only 933 people in 2024. We're up to almost 10,000 in 2025. And then immigration arrests. So the very first thing that happens when you get picked up by ICE, those have quadrupled in the region from 2000 in 2024 to 8,800 plus in last year. And so we're seeing just skyrocketing numbers. And in Massachusetts, you may remember we saw two major surges, Operation what they call Patriot and Patriot 2.0. The first one was up in May 2025, where 1,500 people were arrested in just 1 month. And then the second one, 1,400 people also just in the month of September. These are surges where they're like bringing a lot of help from other federal agencies, from ICE agents from other states, and just really surge in that area for that particular time. And that is what we saw in May and September of last year. But ICE is still here. They're still here every day picking up people, even though they haven't done those surges since last September. Who's getting arrested and deported? First of all, people obviously without immigration status. So if you're undocumented, you are very vulnerable, as you have always been. But now, newly, people who are in the process of obtaining immigration status are very vulnerable to being picked up by ICE. Why? Because in that process, they have given over their address, biometrics, and information to ICE as they're seeking that. Either it's asylum or some other kind of status where you have actually given your information to ICE because you maybe do a status or are hoping to get that status. Those people, as you can imagine, are very easy to find because they know where you live, where you work. And it just takes a little bit of work on the process on ICE to figure out, what time you get home, what time they're going to be able to find you. We sometimes see vehicles outside of homes doing surveillance to know when that person comes home from work and when they can get picked up in the morning. We're also seeing people for whom the government has taken away status. So somebody who had legal status, but the government, for one reason or another, takes it away from them. They are vulnerable to deportation. And that includes political targets like what we saw with Rumeysa Ozturk. As you remember, the government was clear that she was targeted not because she lacked status. She was a student on a student visa. She still is. But she was targeted because of her political speech. And she was picked up by ICE, as you know. And then, of course, we see some mistakes happen. And I only mention that because it's getting harder and harder to fix those mistakes. Mistakes were always present in the system, but as you saw with Abrego Garcia, it's getting harder and harder to fix mistakes when somebody is deported or arrested wrongfully. And almost 80% of people arrested in Massachusetts have no criminal record. Where are arrests happening? Everywhere. On the street, in vehicles, at courthouses. Courthouse arrests have tripled. In workplaces, at homes, at ICE check-in appointments. These are people who have status or have an ability to be here. They go to check in as required by ICE and they get arrested at the ICE office, often in Burlington. Many of you may be out there doing the witness times in Burlington. People go in and don't come back out. At the airport, and of course at police stations, jails, and prisons, as they have always been. So interestingly, CNN did a poll. They did some research and found that the tactics being used in blue states versus red states is very different. And they specifically called out Massachusetts, where they said that the difference between the way ICE works here is so different because 94% of immigrants that were arrested here in the time they were looking at were arrested what they call in community, meaning out on the street, right? These are not people who they picked up in jails or in prisons because they're serving sentences. They're people, most people are getting picked up out on the street. And 78% of those people had no criminal record whatsoever. That's, in fact, the highest percent of non-criminals of any other state in the country. The Wall Street Journal also did a fantastic series, and I think the title of it was ICE's Tactics Were Born in the Streets of Boston or something like that. I'll share the slides so you'll have all these links. But these are all snippets of videos that you may have seen where they show that Todd Lyons, who's the head of ICE and was from Boston, really focused like the trial run of a lot of these violent tactics in the metro Boston area. So the smashing in of car windows, the pulling people out of vehicles. These violent tactics actually seem to have been born here in Massachusetts. So this is a very interesting piece that the Wall Street Journal put together. One other piece of data is U.S. Attorney Foley. She is the Department of Justice prosecutor here in Massachusetts, recently reported a 12,000% spike in immigration-related lawsuits. That means anyone who is wrongfully arrested and goes to federal court on a habeas corpus petition, or anybody who is seeking relief in the federal courts from deportation, a 12,000% spike. So that just tells you how many more arrests they are making in the area. That's just another data point. Okay, and now with that little bit of an update, I want to give some policy updates because as frustrating as things can be, we actually are seeing some movement in Massachusetts. And so the good news is that, especially post Minneapolis and post the two murders of US citizens, Massachusetts are responding to public pressure. And that's all of you calling and making noise. They are starting to really respond with policies instead of just words, right? And so we've seen executive orders, municipal ordinances, new state legislation that's actually starting to move. These are things that have been percolating for a very long time, as you know, but are actually starting to get some more momentum now that we haven't seen in the past. And so Governor Healy filed an executive order that bans new 287G agreements with state agencies, says that there can't be civil arrests in non-public areas of state-controlled facilities, that ICE can't use state facilities for immigration enforcement. And it's important to note that that executive order is already in effect. And so these things have already gone into effect and are partially like a law. Mayor Wu also issued an executive order. It builds on the Boston Trust Act. It reaffirms that de-escalation protocols to protect the peaceful protesters and ensure public safety across the city are still there. And interestingly, it says that any warrantless entry into your home or business, if somebody tries to enter your home without a warrant, you can call 911 in Boston. And that includes if a federal agent is trying to enter your home, and that Boston police are supposed to respond with de-escalation tactics and that they will use their body cameras to record the whole interaction. And then they're going to use that footage and they are going to release it publicly. So if Boston police capture footage of any property damage or violence, even if it happens by federal agents, they're going to release that to the public. So it's sort of about accountability and about a little bit of deterrence to try to stop a terrible situation. And it also reaffirms that the Boston police will investigate all criminal conduct, even if done by federal agents, which is something that, we saw in Minneapolis, where there was this like fight over jurisdiction when the federal agents were doing violent things. And then it also affirms that there's no use of city facilities for immigration enforcement. Other cities stood up with Mayor Wu on the same day that she filed her executive order. Cambridge, Lynn, Newton, and Somerville did their own orders that have very similar language to Mayor Wu's. And there's been a bunch of other municipal ordinances. I just want to highlight that in Boston, there is the Trust Act, and that was reaffirmed. In Worcester, there's an executive order that is similar to the Trust Act about just not helping ICE. And in Springfield, there's a Welcoming City Ordinance. And I highlight those three just because they are the three most populous cities in the Commonwealth. And so we have a lot of sort of ground area and population covered by these. Okay, and so in the state legislature, we have a few things that are pending. As there's been so many bills on these issues for many, many years. And the things that seem to be moving right now are something called the Protect Act, which was filed by the Black and Latino Caucus. I'll go over what's in that in a minute. And a supplemental budget that was filed by Governor Healy that also includes some elements. Quick highlights on the Protect Act. Again, I will share these slides so you don't have to take notes or pay too much attention. There is a partial ban on 287G agreements, which I'll explain what they are in a minute. Police can't ask about immigration status, can't use state or local resources for the primary purpose of civil immigration enforcement. Limits on police sharing non-public information with ICE. There's some rights and protections for ICE detainees. Excuse me. It expands access to UNT visas, which are visas for victims, and no civil immigration arrest in courthouses, which is very important, as you've seen with the tripling of courthouse arrests. Excuse me. In the sub-budget filed by Governor Healy, there are similarly no civil immigration arrests for courthouses, and there should be no arrests in childcare centers, public schools, healthcare providers, and places of worship. And then it also talks about how other National Guards can't enter Massachusetts without the governor's approval. Okay, and I want to focus for 1 second on this 287G program. It's something that the ACLU cares a lot about. We really do think it's, as we call it, a quiet weaponizing of our local police departments to build a mass deportation force. 287G contracts are contracts that allow local government officials to be deputized as ICE agents. So you could have a local official in a state agency like the Department of Corrections, a jail, it could be the Fish and Wildlife Department, any state or local agency. You can take people who work there and deputize them as ICE agents. This program has increased tenfold under this administration, and that's because they're putting pressure and money behind it. And so before Trump took office, there were 133 of these contracts around the whole country. And this is what the map looks like today. I pulled it today from the ICE website. There are over 1,300 of these contracts around the country. It will not surprise you how many there are in Florida and Texas, but there are also a bunch of new ones in New Hampshire. New Hampshire had none of these agreements before the Trump administration, the second Trump administration, and now they have, I think, 13. Um, we have one here in Massachusetts, and that is at the Department of Corrections. And Governor Healy has said over and over again that she wants to keep that contract. And so there's some work for us to do there, right? But you can see their proliferation. It's what ICE calls their force multiplier. It really helps them out by taking local people and turning them into ICE agents. And they're going to continue to grow this program. The good news is that 10 states now ban 287G agreements. California, Connecticut, Delaware, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, New Jersey, New Mexico, Oregon, and Washington have bans on signing these agreements. And we could be the 11th, right? This is another way to look at that map. I think this is an interesting study. It's by an outlet called Bolts that has done some really good coverage on this. They took the states that have a Democratic trifecta, which means, the governor, the legislature is all majority Dems. And the ones in blue are places that have this trifecta and state law prohibits 287G agreements. Light blue is there's an executive order by the governor that prohibits it. So that's New Jersey. And then we've got the light yellow, which is where we are, the dark yellow, which is where we do have a Democratic trifecta, but there are state agencies in the program, namely for us, it's the DOC. And so that's just an interesting way to look at all the different states and where they are on this. Our progress in Massachusetts, and we are making progress, is that we have a partial ban in effect under the Governor Healy executive um, order, which is that state agencies in the future cannot sign any of these agreements. So that would include places like the state police, right? Um, or the Department of, I don't know, Transitional Assistance, the Department of Transportation. They can't sign new agreements, but we still have the Department of Corrections existing. The Protect Act does have a proposal that state agencies and municipal agencies couldn't sign them in the future. And we do have a lot of municipal ordinances where cities and towns have said, we are never going to do this. And so those already exist. But we have more work to do, as you see. We still need to end the DOC contract, future DOC contracts. Sheriffs and houses of corrections are not covered by anything. So we've got more work to do. But I just, it's important to take a moment to note that we have made some progress here. Okay, and so I want to just highlight a few of the ways that you can get involved. First of all, there is a hearing on the Protect Act, and that's next Wednesday, March 18th. And if you're thinking to yourself, wait a minute, didn't we just have a hearing on this? You are not dreaming. We did, and we're having a second hearing on it. It's one of these moments in the legislature that I'm sure John Cohen has talked to you about, which is like sometimes there's a straight path and sometimes it just gets messy. And because this is a brand new filed bill and there's just this like, movement around it and urgency around it, it looks a little different than normal. And so there is going to be a second hearing on it, and it is in that same committee, but we're going to do it again and do it again until we win. So you have an opportunity to come in person or on Zoom and testify. You can submit written testimony. It all helps. Trust me, when I say that it all helps. You do not need to be an expert on these issues. They really just need to hear that this is the moment to take action and that we're not going to stop until they do. Um, if you want more information, you can email Hiba at Field First, who's going to be coordinating some of this testimony and can get you more information. I'm sure there'll be some sort of a toolkit, probably the same toolkit we used at the last hearing. But we would love to have your participation there. Every person who testifies really, really helps. Um, Always like to shout out Luce. If you're not already involved, consider volunteering or donating to Luce. They do an amazing, amazing job at this Ice Watch. They are a model for other states. We are very, very lucky to have them in Massachusetts. They're looking for volunteers who speak these languages. That's their website, and we just love to make sure everyone knows about them and can support. Attend the next No Kings rally. The ACLU is very excited to be one of the lead organizations with Mass 5051 and Progressive Mass and everybody else who's like really, really involved in this. Please come out and attend No Kings. The big one obviously is going to be in Boston, and there's going to be ones all over the state. We want to make this one the biggest one yet. That's the QR code for more information. There's going to be great speakers and great music and action tables. And if you are an organization, you can also sign up to host an action table. And the action tables are really places where your organization can bring your information about ways that people can get involved. And really, we want this to not just be a time to be together and march and rally, but a time for people to pledge to continue to take action on a regular basis. So we're going to be asking people to take a pledge to do a weekly action. I know that you all have a lot of those actions already happening, so please come out. And then if you're doing any work at the local level, we'd love to support you in that. You can think about a welcoming city ordinance to get your police and other local agencies out of the business of helping ICE. We also have a campaign around the flock system, which is the license plate reader technology that we have discovered shares all that information with ICE, even if maybe the agencies that signed up to use it don't know. And we have a dedicated email to that, municipal@aclum.org. Please reach out to us if you're interested in doing more in your city and town. Every one of these ordinances really helps. And I will just plug that we have a fantastic resource kit on our website about flock itself. We were doing a lot of work to get these flock contracts out of our municipalities, and we recently had our first victory in Cambridge, where Cambridge ended its contract with flock once they found out what was happening. So that's it for me. Thank you again for your attention. I know that was a lot of information, so I look forward to your questions.
Awesome. And can we get, before I go into the questions that have come up in the chat, can we get a round of Zoom applause? Okay.
Thank you so much.
Very, very much deserved. Thank you. And that was a lot of information. So we saw questions in the chat, and I want to make sure that we get through them. So if you have a question while we're doing questions, feel free to drop it in the chat. If a question comes new to you, feel free to use the hand function, drop it in the chat, message me directly, whatever you feel most comfortable with for asking your question. I'm going to do the chat ones. They're in the queue first. Have a question from Lorna, who had asked, are ICE agents in Massachusetts actually from Massachusetts? And if not, where are they staying while here?
That's a great question. I think we've seen a mix. Obviously, we don't know
Mm-hmm.
exactly where they're from, but we know that they've stayed at. I saw some great protests outside the Hyatt in Medford.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in my town, in my city. They, do tend to stay at hotels when they surge like this, and I've, seen people out there with noisemakers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and especially during these surges, and they're not just ICE, right? They bring in agents from other
Mm-hmm.
agencies as well. So CBP, which is Customs Border Protection, who you would normally see nearer to the border or at airports have been helping out, but also the FBI. And so it's not even just ICE anymore. We're seeing FBI, DEA, something they call Homeland Security investigations, which used to be focused on like transnational crimes and human trafficking. Now they're just doing random ICE arrests. So they do bring them in from all over the place. And I know that, Luce and others look out for license plates. We see a lot of license plates from other states in terms of the ICE vehicles.
Super helpful and to know. So I see a question from Norma that my understanding is is that local police cannot intervene if they're witnessing an assault by ICE, nor can they intervene in stopping bodily harm. I was asking, like, is that correct?
Yeah, they can't interfere. So I think intervene, I would use the word interfere. They can't interfere with an ICE agent doing their job, right? In terms of the law, right? There is under state law a duty to intervene when there's violence happening, and there's, different police departments have different policies around that. So I would say, they can't stop an ICE agent from carrying out an arrest, but there could be, of course, each situation is going to be different, but there could be some duty or at least some opportunity for a police officer to intervene in violence.
Really useful to know because I think I've heard that question come up a lot. Question from Kathy is about why are the governor and the legislature retaining the DOC agreement with ICE?
So I don't want to put words in Governor Healy's mouth, but you can see for yourself in her press, just Google it. I mean, she has been out in the press saying she thinks it is appropriate that for people who are sentenced to 2 years, to more than 2 years in prison, who are the people who are in our Department of Corrections, the state prison, that it is appropriate, these are her opinion, that when they finish up their sentence that they should be handed over to ICE because she still wants to be able to collaborate with ICE on criminal law enforcement. I think a lot of us disagree with that. I think we think the harm outweighs any benefit. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, and I think kind of underscoring that point, it's that one. I think that she very much so clearly views it within a law enforcement paradigm that we viewed like was really never that good to begin with ICE, which has been like a problematic agency throughout the entirety of its existence, and like right now calling what ICE is doing, quote unquote, law enforcement, stretches the definitions of both law and enforcement, given kind of a lot of them have the kind of blatant criminality that we've been seeing from ICE. So I think that there's like a fundamental kind of paradigm mismatch in her approach to it, as well as it speaks to the need that we need to do to just change general narratives around incarceration itself.
Yeah.
That really shape how that's talked about and viewed as the governor, rather than thinking of people post release as people to be reintegrated in the community, as like the best of reentry programs do. And I would just stress to people here, it is important to call Healy on that as well, knowing that the legislature is unlikely to touch it if the governor is very protective of it. So calls are especially valuable to the governor on that. I see a question from Edwin about how is Healy's proposal supposed to be enforced if kind of
Yeah.
isolating federal policy trumps states' efforts like Healy's?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think we're seeing that play out in other states as well. We're not the first state to try to stop ICE from coming into um, what they call sensitive locations, like childcare centers and hospitals. It's tricky and there's no clear answer. I think what the governor's probably doing is sort of taking that first step to just make that declaration, like there can't be ICE arrest here. And what we've seen in other states is, and I think California is the best example, is that when you state that, does have a deterrent effect where maybe ICE doesn't want to get into litigation around this, and so they stop doing enforcement at hospitals. And luckily, that's not where we've seen enforcement in Massachusetts, but it is maybe the first step. But it's not foolproof, and we've been careful to not say that it's foolproof, right? Like it doesn't mean ICE isn't going to be there. And in fact, we did see U.S. Attorney Foley say in the Boston Globe, I believe, when some local paper, that she doesn't care what state law is. They're going to do what they're going to do, and so there may be a legal fight there.
I think that that's kind of a good point to note that it's like both the enforcement area is gray. However, given that so many like you think about ICE as wanting to take the easiest opportunities available for them, and that's something we've seen in some of the worst of their abuses. If that there's any sense that they might like, if there might be a court case from like something, it there might be at least some second thought before doing that, even though that's not like a
Yeah.
surefire kind of protection. I think question from Norma asking about the Plymouth County Jails kind of ICE agreement, since
Yeah.
people are being held there.
Yeah, so Plymouth is the one place in Massachusetts. Well, that is not true because we have Burlington. So Plymouth is the only jail in Massachusetts that has a contract with ICE to rent space, rent beds to ICE. And there's about 500 men being held there on any given day. They're held there for a very short amount of time. It could be a day or two, a week, and then they're very quickly moved out of state, often through Hanscom. Um, the ACLU has advocated against ICE detention for a very long time. As you can imagine, that's tricky right now when that is the only facility left in Massachusetts where people have at least a chance to go in front of an immigration judge in Massachusetts before getting shipped out. So it's very tricky at this moment. And the legislature has not, it's nowhere in the bill that, it's not in the Protect Act to shut down that one. It's not in the executive order. There's really no appetite for that right now in the State House, I think, given how complicated it is. But I do have hope that that can be like the next level of advocacy is to just end ICE detention across the country. And if that means taking one jail at a time, that might be what's necessary.
It's a great point. I'm going to do one more from the chat, then I'm going to go to those who have their hands raised, and I'm going to go back to the chat. This is a simple one. Question from Anne. Will you send your slides?
Absolutely.
Hey.
Happy to do that.
And I'll shout out kind of Edwin's point about the need for both kind of action at the State House as well as street protests. But I'm going to call on Martha and then call on Bill, and then I'm going to go back to the chat.
Hiya. So yeah, I've been documenting um a lot of kidnappings from the courthouse, both from the back, which seems to be a state transfer of folks like through the back of the courthouse, which I don't understand, but it seems a little bit more planned and thought through. And then I've been seeing a lot of kidnappings and documenting a lot of kidnappings through the front of the courthouse. And that is just flying in the face with the whole idea of safe spaces in the court. And so my question is twofold. How is that allowed right now? These are folks that, you know, they have not served 2 years. They're coming in for something little and then getting taken away. Um, and they're not even found guilty yet, right? And then
Right.
two, who are the people that we pressure to change those court policies to ensure that at least the front entrance isn't where ICE can hang out and just wait? Um, or things like who pays for the security guards? Can we ensure that there's language tucked into the budget that says the stupid trial court security cannot um, coordinate with ICE? Because right now they're also doing whatever ICE needs them to do to make their life as easy as possible. And that's not their job, and that's not what we're paying them for.
Yeah.
So I know it's a lot of commentary, but
No, and I think you're absolutely right. The courthouse arrests are a huge problem, and they have tripled, according to news reports, in Massachusetts in the past year. Um, your first question is why is that allowed? Is because there's no law that prohibits that, right? There's no law that we have been able to pass that would prohibit that kind of assistance and collaboration and working hand in hand. The proposals that are in the State House right now, and I think are getting a lot of attention, would actually address that by saying, first of all, ICE can't make arrests in the courthouse. And so the details are still being, sort of worked out, House, Senate, all that stuff. We're waiting on the Senate to maybe file their own version of something slightly different. We'll see. But the House version of the Protect Act does have a prohibition on arrests inside courthouses, and that's both inside the courtroom and like, the hallways and the lobby, like inside the courthouse. And then there's your question about like the back, right? The parking lot in the back. Does ICE get special access to a back exit or not? And what does that mean? Is that collaboration? And then the Protect Act also has a prohibition on court staff alerting ICE that somebody is in there by sharing non-public information. So if you're in court, there's something called the docket, right? Which is it says who's going to be in court that day, and that is a public document. It'd be very difficult to restrict ICE from seeing that because anybody can see that. But, we shouldn't be alerting them. We shouldn't be giving them a heads up. We shouldn't be facilitating them grabbing a person from the courthouse for all the reasons that you say. And so that a lot of those elements are in the Protect Act. And so, we're going to continue to engage on that. And I know that the Public Defender's Office and the Massachusetts Committee of Defense Lawyers have really taken the lead on that. And so we're really following their lead because they're the experts on this.
And then Bill, and then I'll go back to the chat.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. And thanks, Laura, for your presentation and all the work you're doing. My question relates to Martha's question. Back in January, there was a Los Angeles Times article about one of the people charged in what is touted as the biggest jewelry heist in American history. And that person was detained by ICE and deported to Ecuador. And the case is now in the process, apparently, of being dismissed based on LA Times reporting. So my question is, there was also a case in Boston Municipal Court last March where someone was in the process of being prosecuted for a relatively minor crime of lying on a license application of some sort, and that person was also taken away. And I'm curious to know the extent to which these things might be happening in Massachusetts. Like, for example, the Globe, when that arrest had happened in Boston Municipal Court, editorialized about what if it had been a rape case. I mean, are they actually going to take accused rapists out of court and deport them so they don't have to stand trial? Is that actually what is going to happen, um, or is happening? I mean, it would be mind-boggling if it is, but apparently they believe they have the power to do that.
It is happening. It's absolutely happening. People get grabbed from court in the middle of a trial. They get grabbed from court when they are, so they're pre-trial, right? Like somebody who hasn't gone through the whole process. And that really interferes with, and this didn't used to happen. Like this was not normal. This was not normal practice under the Obama administration. You would see ICE wait for the entire criminal process to wrap up, right? It was not common at all. But what you see now is people just being picked up because they have this like 3,000 daily quota and they don't really care who they pick up. It's the reason why even, prosecutors like District Attorney Ryan from Middlesex County has been so vocal about stopping ICE arrests in courthouses because in her point of view, it interferes with a victim's right to, face their accuser. And if, from the defendant's side, it interferes with the defendant's right to like maybe clear themselves of the charges, right? It just interferes with the whole process. And so it does happen and it's highly problematic.
So I guess just a quick follow-up, how can these be publicized? Because if the public knows about this kind of thing going on, I can't imagine there wouldn't be people screaming bloody murder about it.
That's a great question. I think there have been some groups that have done court watch programs. I could find out more and see if there's, oh, you know who it is? I think Bijan and the accompaniment network might have a court watch program. I don't know if that's their focus right now, but certainly, being present in court, and Lucy might do some of this as well, and letting the world know that, people are getting picked up mid-trial, yeah, it's absolutely a way that you could take action. Yeah.
I want to just note because it's relevant to this, and then go to some other questions in the queue from Anil. That it feels important to note that ICE is not just targeting the accused. Witnesses are also either being removed or not showing up for fear for being cornered and abducted. To
Yeah,
go
absolutely.
to go up to back things in the chat from Mary Beth. Why don't we hear about agents facing consequences for illegal actions?
Well, that is a complicated question, right? First and foremost, we know that they're not policing themselves, right? That there are laws, federal laws and federal regulations that they're not even following. And so ICE is not, they're not policing themselves, right? Um, and then it's just very difficult, as you saw probably in Minneapolis with the jurisdictional issues, where the Minneapolis investigators were trying to even just get to the crime scene, um, and were not allowed by the federal agents just even access to get their own, excuse me, the evidence. And so that is still working. It's, there's just a lot of back and forth on that. What we are seeing is that we're seeing local prosecutors and local police starting to say, look, we're going to prosecute you, right? We're going to, in Mayor Wu's executive order, we're going to investigate crime, even if you are a federal officer who is doing the crime, right? So we're starting to see that more and more, and that's going to continue to be tricky, but it's really important, to press our local prosecutors, police, mayors to take a very public stance that they will do their jobs, even if the perpetrators are federal agents.
This one would be quick. I had a question from Pam about noting how there's going to be tabling from various groups at the kind of the Boston Common No Kings, and asked for some encouragement for the local No Kings rallies to also have tabling and other opportunities, which I thought was a great suggestion to be passed on to the planning team. From Mark, does the ACLU website list the municipalities that participate in Flock?
Yes, the resource kit does have information, and if you don't find it there, there's an email address to get in touch with, and we can figure out if your city or town participates in Flock. Back to the question about No Kings. So the ACLU is helping organize the Boston one, but each
Mhm.
city and town has its own organizing committee. So if you're interested in attending a certain one, they're just it's very decentralized. So if you're
Yeah,
interested in having tables at your city or town one, get in touch with them. And those are all on the nokings.org website.
awesome. From Veronica. She asked about if we should be doing anything around stopping the construction of warehouses or renting out of warehouses to be used as ICE facilities.
Absolutely. We have not seen that in Massachusetts yet. It doesn't mean it won't come here. What we did see in New Hampshire, you probably saw that there was a planned facility there, and there was so much activism around it that they were able to shut it down. Fantastic work up in New Hampshire. So we may get there ourselves here. There was like a leaked list of the facilities that were going to be expanded at one point, and the only facility in Massachusetts was the JFK building in City Hall, which is already a federal building, so I don't know what they would do there. Um, Relatedly, if the Burlington facility is incredibly problematic, it's an office building that was never meant to house people long term. And so if you're doing any advocacy around that, I encourage you to get in touch with the folks that are doing the witnessing in Burlington.
Great. And I'm going to combine a question from Fred and a question from Pam, which was about the Protect Act. One of them was a question about the ACLU's position on the Protect Act, and then one on if there are specific things that we should be advocating for around strengthening the bill.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we're going to do is put out that toolkit again that we had last time, that we are supportive of it, as are many organizations. I think there's some tweaks that we're going to need to make. The first thing that we noticed was that it didn't apply to sheriffs in their capacity as jailers, and we needed to apply in terms of the limits on how they can collaborate with ICE. Generally, it's a really good step forward. There's like details we need to strengthen, but in general, we're very supportive and just want to get it to the finish line.
Awesome. A question, I think Marie's question in the chat, Marie, correct, you can feel free to correct me if wrong. Question about kind of the courts was kind of largely touched on in the discussion earlier with the response to Martha's question. I saw a question from John in the chat about whether detainees are being refused bond, like kind of the issue of like bond hearings and ICE detainees.
Yeah, we're seeing that they're doing fewer bond hearings. I'm not sure what the question is. Fewer bond hearings. It's very hard to get out right now. There's just it's very difficult, especially if you're moved out of state, which is what they do, right? They move you to Louisiana or Texas, where those courts are just very, very hard, very difficult, and there's a backlog. So it's just harder than ever to get bond right now.
From
And
April.
then, of course, there's just the law that was passed by Congress, the Lake and Riley Act
Mhm.
last year, which made it so that if you've ever committed a whole host of minimal crimes, including shoplifting, you're not even eligible for bond. So you're not even able to go before a court. There's litigation around that, and some strides have been made in courts.
Great, thank you. A question from April is about, are there any other state level policies that our legislature might consider turning into law? Any examples some other states we might follow? Then she asked particularly about kind of legislation that we've seen and kind of that, like I think California passed legislation around requiring ICE agents to not wear masks. And is that something useful or enforceable to pursue?
The truth is that we are behind other sort of like-minded states. If you think about the other states who espouse progressive values, we are really behind in terms of immigration legislation. We were the 17th state to pass the driver's license bill, right? Not the first, right? We're first in many ways, but on immigration, we're very far behind. So we're playing catch up here. I think things like the masking ban are difficult to enforce from the state level, but also, it's great to think about, pushing the envelope when you've already passed all these bills like Illinois, California, even Connecticut, New York, New Jersey have passed so many of the things we've been advocating for over a decade here in Massachusetts, that I think it's important to really focus on what's the most urgent and crucial things right that we can do right now, and that is to stop these ICE raids at the courthouse, to divorce our local police from federal immigration enforcement, and the other priorities that we laid out.
I'm gonna do one from the chat. I'm gonna do Edwin's hand, and then I'll round out the chat. And thank you, and thank you, Laura. These are I think it's great questions from the chat and super
Great questions.
answers.
Great question.
So a question from Judith and a question from Keith that both asked about the relationship between the Safe Communities Act and kind of and the Protect Act. Like of where does the kind of advocacy around a bill like the Safe Communities Act, and I'll even note as well with like the Dignity Not Deportations Act, where do those both stand in relation to the
Yeah.
Protect Act and what the legislature is doing?
I think we're in that time in the legislative cycle, plus the political reality, where a lot of the bills that have been around for a while are just getting funneled into what's like most crucial. 287G is in the Safe Communities Act, in Dignity, Not Deportation. So that's one piece that has been brought over from those bills. So I think those bills really became the basis of what's happening now. And then we'll see what's left over to do. After we win these victories, we'll see what's left.
I'm gonna go to Edwin's hand and then the last few in the chat.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm actually going to take this into slightly different direction, but it's related to what Amy was asking. If we want to stand up to ICE in Massachusetts, yes, all these things are great and are needed, and we definitely need to catch up, but it's going to take pressure from us, but also people that think like us who understand that this is not right, this is not just. And so I'm wondering about all the mechanisms that allow for the collaboration, support, access between the local and state agencies, mainly law enforcement and the feds. And I think of like things like ShotSpotter, like the technology that is doing the surveillance, the operating systems that they have on their phones. You know, a huge contract with Palantir to develop this technology, right? That reads like that has like facial recognition, you know, that comes from a super database that they've been building. Things like, you know, right now the Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism just published a whole thing about the state police is actually buying all kinds of drones, massive amounts of drones. And I'm going to put their article in the chat. You know, just to say, you know, just to make us safe and prepare for the World Cup. This is what they've been saying since 9/11. This is all about national security, but we've seen over and over that these technologies, in fact, are not making our cities safer, are not, you know, creating that trust between the community and law enforcement, in particular, both at the local, state, and federal level. And so, and never mind, you know, the access to our personal data. And yes, there's progress that has been made, but you know, not to, you know, undermine the work that was done around the bill that allowed undocumented immigrants to access driver's license. But it wasn't a perfect bill. It has almost zero protections for the personal data that may or may not be shared with the feds when they apply for driver's license. And I'm just wondering about that aspect of, you know, disrupting the relationship, support, and access that the state is doing through the local, you know, state and agencies, what the feds, especially with all the what's going on right now. And I'm not sure that enough attention is being paid to that. And Flock, I think, and just kudos to Laura. Hi, Laura. It's a really good example, you know, of how, you know, this is happening, but you know, they have us so, you know, in such a reactionary mode where we're reacting to like the raids, their massive operations, you know, because we have to, you know, do mutual aid, we have to do the legal support for the individuals and their families, but there's this all the massive amount of problems that are being created that need to be paid attention to.
Yes, and hi Edwin, so great to see you. Absolutely, couldn't agree more. There are just networks and networks and networks of collaboration. We're not going to get to it all in this one bill, but it's a very good first step. there'll be more to do afterwards. And like you said, it would take dismantling these structures that were built after 9/11, where there was so much money and just training that went toward local federal collaboration. Part of it is a messaging piece of just convincing people that we're in a different world here, right? Like, if you think that ICE is a good partner in, criminal, in fighting crime and keeping our communities safe, then I don't know, read something because they can't be trusted right now. Even if you thought that, 2 years ago, they've shown that they can't be trusted, that they're not about public safety. And I think we're in a moment where we have an opportunity, to Edwin's point, of really shifting that narrative about how are we working with these folks at all.
Okay, so a few more questions. I saw a question from Judy asking about the 104 new SUVs purchased at Burlington, and what's like kind of a question of what that's for and what we know about what they're up to.
Well, we don't know, but like I said, the Burlington office covers all of New England, so it could mean that they are preparing a surge anywhere in the New England area. They had talked about Maine at some point. We don't really know. It was very important to see those come in so that we could sort of brace, and it did help. I think it did help us prepare a little bit more, but we just don't know.
Then I saw a question from Norma who noted about virtual hearings and the way that those existed often during COVID for people not being able to person. Is there any push to allow people who might be afraid to go into a courthouse to kind of go to have like kind of court hearings virtually?
I don't know in terms of the state courts. I know that a lot of the immigration court hearings are done virtually, but I actually don't have the answer to that. I think the folks to ask would be CPCS, the public defenders, or Prisoner Legal Services, PLS. They would know more about that than I do.
Awesome, thank you. I see in Kia's question in the chat that the ability to call the police if ICE breaks into someone's house without a warrant seems to be an illusory protection, if a protection at all. Shouldn't police protect residents against Fourth Amendment violations, even if committed by federal agents?
Yeah, I absolutely hear that, and it's something that a lot of advocates said, and Mayor Wu addressed herself in a meeting with advocates, like, look, this is not perfect, and I know that many communities are not going to call the police no matter what, that they're not going to feel safe calling the police no matter what. Um, I think it's important to say it, to say our police are going to stand up for our communities no matter who the perpetrator is. Is it perfect? No.
And I see from the chat question about will you speak to how sheriffs across the state are cooperating with ICE? So speak, commenter noting about how Mass Bail Fund has witnessed people being kidnapped after being bailed.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, my colleagues from CFFJ, which is the Coalition for Juvenile Justice, have done an amazing job. It's been in the Globe and in a couple of other places where they've been quoted. They've done some public records requests that really get at that question of how sheriffs are working together with ICE to either just let them know when a person's about to be released from their custody, when a pretrial person is about to be moved to court where they can be arrested. It's definitely a thing, and it is the Protect Act does have some elements to address that issue. But I would say let's see if I can find a link to put in the chat. But they've done some really great research around.
And it's a question from Lori asking about should we be protesting against quotas for ICE? And about like what purpose do they even serve in terms of public safety?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the narrative. Like, the idea of quotas like goes back to, if you look at history, right, there's always been the use of quotas. So I think it's an important piece to highlight in the narrative, and to say, look, this is not about public safety. This is about meeting some random number that Steve Miller, I think, came up with. So if you think this is about public safety, this is another piece of information to hopefully change your mind. And it's a federal quota, right? Like,
yeah,
that's where it's coming from.
I've seen Linda's question in the chat about why doesn't the city of Burlington come down on the owner who is leasing to ICE since city zoning laws are being violated?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure why. I know that it's been talked about, but I would encourage you, if you know anybody in the town of Burlington, to get in touch with those town officials and ask those questions. I know that our congressional delegation has been there and has asked some of those questions, but they certainly are not resolved. So I would encourage you to find out more through any friends that you might have who live in Burlington.
I want to just note in the chat, there's been a lot of great discussion about the bearing witness kind of routine actions outside Burlington. See a note about the group Democratism working around giving kind of getting states to kind of defend people, having a private right of action for harms created by by federal agents. This is more stuff about Burlington. I see a question from Pam. Is there a list we can reference to know what to ask local mayors and police departments to do?
There's no one list, but if you want to reach out to us at municipal@aclum.org, we can walk you through. It's important to sort of find out what your city or town has already done. And then we can sort of take it from there. There's certainly a welcoming city ordinance we can give you some language on. There's the flock ordinance. There's a couple of others, but it's really sort of town to town, city to city. So reach out if you want to learn more.
Awesome. So I will do Phil's question. I will do Martha's question. We'll do another round of applause, and then we will call our legislators, and then we will enjoy the rest of our evenings. So Phil's question was, didn't Burlington pass an ordinance recently regarding the ICE detention center, and is ICE just ignoring it?
I thought it was a resolution,
Okay.
but I am not 100% up to date on that.
Okay. Can follow up with that. Martha, your question, and then we will do another round of applause for Laura.
Does a lawyer have to ask for state transfer of someone from custody, or it can just be an ICE agent?
Can you say that a little bit? Can say a little bit more? I'm not sure I understand.
So my understanding is a lot of people are being transferred from state custody into ICE custody at the courthouse. And in order to ask for that, does it have to be a lawyer, or can it just be an ICE agent that asks to transfer custody?
So they can just, the ICE, what we're seeing is that they're just arresting people. They're not asking for a transfer of custody. They are just, if you are in the courthouse, they're just arresting you there. That's my understanding. Yeah.
I see Keith noting in the chat that it was a resolution as opposed to an ordinance for Burlington. Pam asking if you can repeat the email address for about municipal ordinances and action. You can drop that in the chat. Yes, awesome. municipal@aclum.org. Finally, before we close out, another round of Zoom applause for our wonderful speaker this evening, and for answering so many really good questions that people have.
Great questions.
I'm
Thank you
always
for
happy
having
when
me.
people have really good questions, and also equally happy when we have people who are able to answer the really good questions.
I'm doing my best, and
exactly
if there's
why-
anything I can just restate is that we really are making progress. So keep doing what you're doing.
Awesome. And so with this, I'm going to round out the recording, but if you're able to stay on, let's stay on and make calls and kind of make some calls to our legislators. So kind of with that, I will kind of formally thank you to everybody for being here. And thank you to all of those watching later this recording.